Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is being hosted by AHDB. My name is Chloe McKee and I'm the Knowledge Transfer Officer for Beef and Lamb. I'm pleased to bring you tonight's webinar discussing efficient suckler systems and what can we learn from Canada. Our presenter this evening is Professor Bart Lardner from the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. And the plan of action tonight is that Bart will run through a 35-minute presentation and then there will be time for questions at the end. You will all stay muted throughout the webinar, but if anyone would like to ask a question, then please type your question into the box on the side of your screens. If you can't see this box, you may have to click the orange arrow to open it up. I will then ask Bart your questions once he's finished presenting. So hopefully there won't be any technical difficulties tonight, but please bear with us if there are any. So I'll now hand over to Bart.
Well, thank you very much, Chloe, and welcome everyone online. And it's a great pleasure to be here in the UK and visiting with a number of farmers over this past week, and then being able to talk about our cow-calf systems and sector in Canada. A little bit about my past is I come from a grain and beef ranch in northern BC. Grew up farming with my father and got the education bug in the early to mid 20s, and so I did continue to help on the farm, but continued on obviously through academia, and now I'm teaching and doing research in this whole area. So the next slide just shows our resources in the University of Saskatchewan, and we're building a new center called Livestock Forage Center of Excellence, and it's encompassing everything from birth to slaughter in terms of the beef animal. We have quite a land base, as you can see, and an Angus-based herd, but we also have another herd of Herefords and Simmental influence. And so my program is really all about applied research. It's about how do we manage that gestating beef cow over the calendar year in the seasonality of Western Canada. And I'll get into the environment here in a minute. But it really is all about beef and forage systems. And so my area of research is on cow-calf and forage and grazing management. And so how can we manage that cow throughout the calendar year? What's the effect on reproductive efficiency and longevity of her in the herd? You'll see some pictures here in this particular slide of cows out on summer pasture in Canada. And the one down in the bottom right-hand corner is a typical extensive or outwintering system. Swath grazing, we call it, and so that's quite common. It just is a cost-saving system, and I'll speak to that a little bit more. In Canadian beef production today, and in our research environment, we're looking at several things. Certainly, composite breeds are a big thing, crossbreeding, hybrid vigor. We're doing some work looking at DNA parentage. So in Canada, we have large herds. Some of the bigger ones are 600 head, 800 head. And we'll see multi-sire breeding programs in those where they're putting out 6-7 sires or 6-7 bulls exposed to, 2 or 250 cows. And so they never know which one is the prolific sire. And some of our research has shown that in that group of 6 or 7, that one prolific animal, one prolific bull is giving us 52 calves, whereas the other bull that we thought was a promising candidate is only giving 1 calf. And so just using technology like parentage testing to make those cull replacement decisions. Sex semen and marker-assisted selection, just looking at using genomic data to increase the accuracy of EPDs or EBVs in here that I see that you folks talk about. We also are looking at emissions. Environment is big here, I've heard over the last week, and we're getting into our grazing systems and the which one of those pasture types are more effective in reducing methane emission, and so we're able to measure that out there in the pasture with either an SF6 or a green feed system. We're also using GPS and drones in our research, so we can monitor where cattle move and which type of plants they prefer to graze over the grazing season. So we have around 90,000 producers in all of Canada. Mainly the beef herd is located in Western Canada. As you can see, it's a major contribution to the GDP. We are heavily dependent on export, and so we do export over 50 to 60% of our beef to our US counterparts. And so we have a great working relationship with the United States of America, and very dependent on exporting Canadian beef down there. But there's other countries, as you can see, the trilateral agreement with Mexico and US, so beef moves up and down, north to south in North America. Our biggest challenges, probably no different than here, is labor. Finding suitable labor to work in the beef industry on those farms, be it cow-calf or stocker or feedlot, trainable folks, and certainly the cost of everything is going up in terms of land, in terms of resources and feed prices. All those are going up. But we do know that we have an increasing global population, and we do know that protein from a meat source is a very important part of that picture. We're very lucky in Canada, especially in Western Canada. We have millions of acres of native rangeland. So that's range that's been there, evolved over thousands of years. We call that the Northern Great Plains. And that's a very big and very important resource for grazing our beef cow herds. We also have tame seeded. So we'll have a number of tame grass species and legume species that make up and contribute to that forage resource. Mostly family-run operations, multi-generational, certainly not as long in the family as I'm seeing here in England, but 3, 4, 5 generations, and so very proud of their heritage. We have, as I said, a lot of rangelands. You can see 28 million acres in Canada. 15 million of those are in the province where I do my research, Saskatchewan. Summer temperatures, there's a range of 15 to 25, 28, up to 35, 38 degrees Celsius. So it can be quite cool to quite hot. Usually our hot months are July and August. So those are our growing months, we say. We like to see our moisture come in May and in the early part of June. Those weather patterns are changing though. And so we're seeing sometimes July being our most high precipitation month. Our winters are very challenging, as you see. Can get down to minus 35, minus 38. Wind chill factors of a 15-kilometer wind will reduce that down into the minus 50s. When I got on a plane last Friday, it was minus 40 in Saskatoon. So very happy to come here to plus 6 this week and enjoy those milder temperatures. But you wonder, how can we raise a beef cow? Well, we really do pay attention to body condition. And it's very important that we monitor body condition over the winter feeding period. But we do make a generous effort to provide wind protection, to either natural shelter belt or portable windbreaks. And so, it's so key. It also to pay attention to nutrition. So we do a lot of feed testing and ensure that they're adequate energy and protein in those forages that those cows are grazing. Our winters are much different, as you see. From here, we are very cold and very dry. So yes, it might be minus 30, but if she's got a good body condition, a good fat layer and a good hair coat and is protected from the wind, she's quite happy to be out there utilizing those extensive forages. That's just a picture of a slide of what the temperature was when I left, central Saskatchewan last week, minus 40 with that wind chill factor. So you just have to be aware, and you have to manage and monitor your herd going through those winter months. This just shows you where most of the beef cows are. Total number of 3.6 million. We're about, U.S. industry is about 10 times bigger than us. So whatever happens in the U.S., we pay attention to, because we are a big trading partner. As you see, most of the herd is located in the western provinces, and about 88%. So, it's where most of the herd are located, and thus most of the slaughter and finishing operations are made there as well. There's our sectors. As you can see, there's the cow-calf or suckler cow sector, which is the area of my research. And then we have the backgrounding or stalker, we call it. I believe that's equivalent to your store calf. And so we're taking that 5-month-old wean calf and putting about 150, 200 pounds on it slowly until it enters that finishing phase. We're very much a grain finished beef industry. Barley grain is the primary concentrate we'll see in that finishing diet. where in Western Canada, whereas in Ontario, on eastern side of our country, it would be a corn grained finishing program. And then finally the packer and the retail, which I have seen happening is the consumer choice has influenced, somewhat the product or the branded program that's coming out the back end in terms of what type of beef does the consumer want. Is it commodity beef or grain finished beef? Excuse me, or is it maybe a forage finished product? So we're seeing, a portion of our producers looking at alternative programs, including forage systems longer in the life of that animal and less concentrates. This is just a schematic of the production cycle. So spring calving usually, we're seeing some herds go to a summer calving program. Why? Because they're trying to match up the requirements of the lactating female with what the pastures are supplying versus in the January, February, March, we tend to have still cold, frozen winter. And so then we have to provide those nutrients by machinery and at a higher cost. And so let's go to a summer calving program to reduce those costs. From summer, we'll graze them as a pair all through into fall, and then we get into those winter programs. Again, you can see there's a portable windbreak in that last picture with the swath graze program. That's typical of cows out in fields in winter just to give them protection from the wind. Depending on the breed type and the frame size, whether those calves would go into a back running program or maybe right off the cow at 5 months into a feedlot program. We see typically the continental breeds, the Charolais, the Simmental, the bigger frame cattle go right into a finishing program. The British type influence, as you see, Angus or Hereford, probably would be grown out in a store or a back running program, and then go into a feedlot program, a feedlot finishing program. I guess the 5 important breeds that I talk about in Canada, you can see are the 2 British, Angus and Hereford. Red and black are big, and of course a lot of Simmental and Charolais and Limousin probably is the 5th breed. We do see some Gelbvieh. We'll see other breeds as well influencing. But these are the primary ones you'll see, and a lot of different crossbreeding programs coming out of this. We do have a rigorous traceability program, so every animal has to have an RFID tag, a little yellow button, in its ear when it leaves the farm because of reportable diseases. In 2003, we had BSE in May of 2003, and that really shut all of our markets. And so we've brought that in prior, thank goodness, the industry-led program, and it certainly has been important in terms of gaining other export markets and just monitoring any disease outbreaks or issues. We have these BQA programs, Verified Beef Plus. So that's just an audit program to make sure the producer is well documenting his activities. So it's all about nutrition and vaccination programs and herd health. It's all about whether he's managing the water resources correctly or grazing management or feed supplies. And so it's very important because it gives consumer confidence, and in the end, it's really a beef quality assurance program going forward. Those are our KPIs, as you see, I believe quite similar to what you see here in your country. So we do strongly suggest a 63-day breeding season to achieve that conception rate. We do stand by that for older cows. For heifers, we do see some ranchers or producers going to a 45-day program just to select those very fertile heifers that would go as replacements. Some will breed their heifers and calve them before the mature cows, some may not. Preg check is key. Don't want to feed that open cow. Our costs, I work very closely with the economist, and she has suggested that it's about 1,000 Canadian dollars to keep a cow right now in Canada. So that's about, I believe, 550, 560 pounds. So test your bulls, very, very important. BSE tests, and then trying to calve the majority of those calves in the first 21 days of the first cycle. Feed test, obviously you want to know the nutritive value before going into a winter program. And the adoption of outwintering is big in Western Canada, and have a herd health program. So a rigorous work with your local vet, make sure you're vaccinating, and a good mineral program as well is so key. Those are our gold indicators. And growth, you know, you see percent of dam weight, reduce the number of opens with the fertile breeding sire, and make sure your females are cycling well. Try to get that calving season at a decent length, and of course reduce that death loss down to 4%. So just some benchmarks for producers to look at. I'll speak briefly about our unit cost of production. It's just a equation we ask our producers to look at if you're interested to see if what's it going to cost you. The second line is really all about what it costs you to produce 100 pounds or 60 kilos of calf. Don't care whether you calve in January or in May or when you sell a calf, but what does it cost you to produce 100 weight of calf for 60 kilo? How do we calculate that? There's some factors we put into that: number of breeding females, number of females exposed, live calves born, and then it's really all about the pounds of calf weaned per females exposed. So kilos of calves weaned or per females exposed. So ways of lowering your costs, lowering your break even, and you can work on the numerator, decrease the costs. Could be some outwintering programs, or increase the kilos of calf. So that's obviously increasing your preg rate. In my opinion, reproduction is the single most important factor. Open cows don't make you money. You need to sell a calf to service your debt, and it's 5 times more important than growth rate, and even 10 times more than carcass quality. So reproduction so key in a cow-calf operation. We do have deficient soils, and some we see are copper deficient, and so we do monitor fertility by, you know, the soil is the plants that grow on that deficient soil are obviously deficient, and so that's why we're suggesting a good mineral mix. Here's just a graph showing the probability of non-pregnancy, very high as you see in the younger cows. 2 to 3 years there are the solid triangles. And obviously it tapers off as the cow retains in the herd and is a little bit older. Feed's very, very variable from year to year. The hay price, the silage price, the green feed price, and so it's a larger single cost to a producer in Canada. We do strive to look at the smorgasbord of forages that are out there. They are really the backbone of our cow-calf sector. Lots of great grass species and legume species to choose from. There's a website if you want to click onto it. We have lots of fact sheets and YouTube videos I've discovered over the years are a great way of getting the message out. And you can actually shut Bart off after 2 minutes, which you can't do tonight. Those are some of the forages that we've done our research on. On the left are the perennials, and on the right are the annual species. A typical tame introduced forage stand would be the makeup of these. The last 3 on the left there are legumes. So we look at the non-bloat legumes as well as lucerne, which we call alfalfa. And then of course on the right, we've looked at a lot of annual cereals, fall rye, and some C4s like millet and corn. We're getting the cover crops coming in now the last 5 years. So that's the C3s, the C4s, the annual legumes, and the brassica species, the turnip, the radish, the kale. And we're just seeing, do they fit into our short growing season, and how do they provide nutrients for our beef cows. Corn is amazing. It's taken off in the last 10 years. It's adapted to a lot of areas because we have now these low corn heat unit varieties that will produce significant biomass per acre compared to our small grain cereals. So we've done a lot of research on grazing corn, and I'll speak to that as one of our wintering systems. Just here's a few slides of how we do overwinter, or wintering system. Swath grazing, where we grow the annual cereal, could be a barley, could be an oat, could be a triticale. And we put the cows out. We suggest to limit graze 3 to 4 days, just to control access and control utilization and reduce spoilage and wastage. There you can see some a mineral box and a salt block, just to provide out there in that extensive system. It is a way of getting the manure nutrients out there in that nutrient deficient acre of land on your farm or your ranch. And we're also looking at system costs as well. This is a bale grazing system, a little different than what I've seen here. So we'll have hay or straw or maybe a green feed bale out there. And again, we'll place it in a grid pattern, and then we'll allow access 3 to 4 days of grazing, moving that electric wire just to control deposition of manure nutrients and try to reduce wastage. That's what you want to see. That was some research we did back in 2004. Just a good thing that the nitrogen phosphorus are out there for the next growing crop and the next growing season. We obviously do some quick calculations here, just how much comes out the back end in terms of fecal and urine. And just because we chose to graze those 64 cows for 110 days, we were able to leave behind roughly 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre for that next growing season. So versus it being in the pen in that straw pack where it would volatilize off, nitrogen is very mobile, or it might leach out, and so when you go and spread and clean that pen manure out onto the field, you've lost a lot of that nitrogen due to volatilization and leaching. We do have a lot of crop residues, so we graze a lot of crop residues, either annual cereals or maybe some of our legumes, and so it's the straw and the chaff. We feed test, so we know if it's sufficient energy or protein, certainly we'll bring in a protein sup. My question today was what type, and I would suggest maybe an alfalfa hay, just to meet that cow that's out there in first or second trimester of pregnancy. That's a whole bunch on the back of that combine, so it captures that chaff and straw in about a 50, 60 pound pile and dumps it, as you can see, in these piles, and just trying to reduce wastage and trampling, so the cows will stand around there and get after the chaff and the straw in a timely fashion. But it's not, we try not to put lactating cows out there for sure, and they have to be in good body condition. The cover crops I mentioned, they're a big thing. We've just done some research on them, trying to figure out what window of the winter they'll fit best. Some of these varieties are coming out of New Zealand and Australia, so how do they adapt to our climatic conditions in Canada? That's really the challenge. This is the one that's really striking, is growing corn and grazing corn. Typically it's grown for grain or for silage, but now we're seeing a lot of beef operations growing it for grazing whole plant. So yes, we put the cows out there grazing the whole plant. They figure out how to go after these stalks. The one thing we do suggest is you limit graze again at 3 to 4 days. As you can see, some electric paddocks being cordoned off there, because they will start to select those cobs. Cattle are very preferential, and they will figure out what structure on the corn plant is the best, and it's the cob. And then we're dealing with rumen acidosis and bloating cows. So, I figure 3 to 4 days. We try to plant it on a calendar date, so it at the first killing frost, it's about the half milk line. And as I was talking to some farmers today, that's about 50% starch, 50% fiber, to just reduce and buffer or mitigate that drop in pH. We do have to consider that maybe these cows don't know how to go out in the field and find their forage. So I talk about naive cows, cows that might have been pen fed or confined fed. Guess what? Now you have to go walk to your feed and go find it. Essential for a good trace mineral program with these extensive systems, for sure. We have done some research looking at trying to background or store calves on corn, and it's worked quite nicely. Again, a lower cost to gain compared to that confined system. We've done some research in this area, just looking at, as you can see with rumen cannulated cows, just looking at the pH fluctuations in the rumen when they do consume whole corn or maybe whole plant barley, and just saying, is there ways we can mitigate that drop in pH? Yes, there is, by providing a fiber source, or maybe reducing that allocation to a 3 or 4 day. We see corn now being a very popular crop, and so we'll see producers growing it, taking the grain, and then they will come back and graze the residue, the stalks, the stems, the stover, and a really cheap alternative when you've weaned that cow and you want to put her on something. So that's really the time of year that's the lowest in terms of nutrient demand, is when you peel that calf off, you wean that calf. So why not take advantage of that? So hopefully that gives you a bit of a snippet about some of the management systems we have for the cow-calf sector. I just want to shift to another area briefly and talk a little bit about some research we did looking at heifer development, just to finish up here this evening. We went back and said, can we build a better cow, a replacement heifer coming into our program? And we went back to the recommendations, which are quite dated. You see Wiltbank 1969, a 50-year-old recommendation. And so let's look back and say, you know what, our breeds have changed, the size have changed, the increased cost to develop those heifers in feed and in fossil fuels. And so is there an alternative? So we entered into a 2-year study looking at developing them to a different mature body weight pre-breeding than 65%. So maybe a lower percent mature body weight. So 2 sites. I did this research with my colleague, Dr. Rick Funston at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So he did his research at Nebraska, we did ours up there at Saskatchewan. And we used an outwintering or a bale grazing program in the field with these heifers. So really we're looking at how will these heifers adapt to an extensive system. Our idea was, let's put them in a system we're going to ask them to persist in as mature cows and be successful breeding wise. Let's not put them in a confined system on a wet-based diet, giving them all kinds of supplements and concentrates, because they're going to go out there and have to graze swaths or maybe graze residues and as a mature cow, and guess what, get pregnant every year. But you do need to know your mature cow body weight. So weigh your cows and then calculate backwards. You see, we used an equation. And so I really suggest do not guesstimate. So over 2 years, 176 Angus type heifers went to either a moderate gain or a high gain, or a bale graze program in the field, or a dry lot program, confined program, for 202 days from November till June. And most heifer research has gone just to the first preg check, but we continued this to the second and third parity, as I'll show you here in a minute. There's our systems in the confined. They either went to 62% mature body weight pre-breeding, or 55, or the extensive bale graze. Those 2 rate of gains, and the diet was made up of a mixed hay, as well our supplement in this case was rolled barley. Of course, we put out windbreaks in those field systems and adequate bedding, and we had winter watering systems. And that there up in the right-hand corner is just a picture of the bale graze grid system out in the field. We did measure intake. We tried to estimate intake during the summer and the winter, through the development period, and then obviously well into the breeding program the following spring. Just, are they getting enough? We went back to NRC. You see on the bottom rows in this slide, that's telling us what NRC is suggesting they need for intake on a dry matter basis, and then the amount of protein and energy they'll get. And you can see that the bale graze moderate gain 55 was giving that, and in fact the other ones were exceeding that when you look at the intake on a dry matter basis, a pound per head per day. So we weren't starving these, we weren't challenging them, we were just actually trying to have them at a lower body weight pre-breeding. The recommendation was thought that we need those big heavy heifers, they're all going to reach pubertal age. But what we found is that those 55% percentage of them had reached pubertal age, because we measured puberty by looking at the amount of progesterone from a blood sample. 0.1 nanogram, I believe, is indicative of pubertal age. And so we found that some of those 55s were actually gaining puberty during the breeding season. How do they do? How do these heifers do? Well, here's some data showing initial, final. Their average daily gain over the winter, over the development period there, a lower rate of gain you see for the moderates, 1.15 versus the high gains, 1.75. But you'll see the summer average daily gain, the next row, that the moderate gains actually kicked in and compensatory kicked in. So the other key factor is know your mature body weight, but also have adequate pasture quality in the breeding program. That's so key. You see there is a difference in weight at preg check, but there is no difference you see in pregnancy rate and percent conceived the first 45 days. So if we're doing this and it's a negative effect on repro efficiency, it's certainly not a good idea. And that just is accentuated looking at our results on the preg rates. How do those calves do that were born to these heifers? No difference in terms of body weight, birth body weight, or wean weight, as you can see here on the high gain or the moderate gain. And how did the second calves out of those heifers do? No difference there as well on moderate versus high gain. We're really interested in this data. This is how the cows, they are now cows, right? They're older, they've had 2 calves, 3 calves. And so as you see the second preg rate, no difference. And then no difference of their body weight at second calving. And this is the retention. How many of those heifers did we lose? Did we lose more of those moderate gain bell graze heifers? No, we didn't. So they were similar retention percents over the 3 years, irregardless or irrespective, sorry, of the development system. My economist did the numbers for our research in the years we did it, that we were reducing our development costs by $60 per head for that moderate gain versus the high gain. So just something to think about. It's not for everybody. It may not work for your program, but we were just looking at an alternative to, you know, can we maybe bring them into a percent mature body weight without a negative effect on repro efficiency. So you might be developing your heifers in a system that, a grazing system that you're asking them to persist in as mature cows. So that's something to think about. Forages longer in their diet. Is there improved longevity? We don't know. You'll never know until you develop them and look at their retention and try to match the cow or the heifer to the feed stuffs that you have on your farm or your operation and the environment you're asking them to be in. But you do need to know your mature body weight and pasture quality. So I just want to wrap up and acknowledge some of our funders and some of the support. Obviously, the government of Saskatchewan, some of my colleagues, you see Drs. Wood and Anez and Damarin, our economist, Kathy Larson, my technical folks like Leah Pierce and Crystal Savin, and the many grad students. Without them, a lot of this research couldn't be done. And most importantly, AHDB for sponsoring my trip over here. Thank you very much. It's been a fantastic week. And so I'll leave this last slide. It's just our website again. Feel free to click on. And with that, I guess we'll take questions, Chloe.
Thanks very much, Bart. So while I'm waiting for some questions to come up, I'd just like to remind everyone that the presentation has been recorded, so it will be available to watch back on the AHDB YouTube channels. I'd also like to highlight a few resources which you may be interested in. So we've got the suckler record sheet online, which you can print off and record the performance of your herd from calving to weaning. And then you can use these figures to put into our beef KPI calculator and see how you can compare to industry targets. We've also got an A3 poster, which is quite nice to put on the office wall, called the suckler breeding plan. And this plan allows you to fill in details on your current performance and bulls and AI sires used and set targets for the future, which you'd like to improve on through breeding. And you can order that in hard copy as well. So we have got a few questions to start us off already. So the first question, Bart, what is the Canadian view of our live weight auction marts in the UK? So this person said they hear some views over here that it's a way of preventing manipulation of breeders and finishers by deadweight slaughterhouses, whilst others see them as holding back the industry by creating an outlet for out-of-spec cattle, which with better breeding programs would never have existed. What's your view on those?
Can you rephrase that question? Sorry, I'm not getting it. Sorry.
Sorry. What is your opinion, Bart, on our live weight auction marts in the UK as opposed to selling dead weight to a slaughterhouse?
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. So you're selling them as live animals
Yes, yes.
as opposed to maybe on the rail?
Yes, that's right. So the payment would solely be on weight.
Well, we do market a lot of our most of our animals that way as well. We have live weight sale barns, which are where we see most of the cattle being method of the cattle being marketed is that auction system. We'll see sale barns throughout the country. No, I think it certainly is a method of gathering and sourcing animals, you know, from various farmers. Some farmers may not, you know, have a big group of animals to market, but certainly a way of putting 2 or 3 animals to market versus 20 or 30. I guess what I can comment on is the other alternatives we see that producers are going to in Canada is video sales, where they'll video their group or their pen of cattle, and then they'll put that on a website. And then, of course, the order buyers will bid on them, and then the owner will make a decision whether to release them or not. So then he doesn't incur the cost of trucking that animal to the sale barn or the auction market. We see that as another alternative to live auction sales or live cattle auction sales. I don't know if I've answered your question, sorry, but
I guess, would you say, Bart, at the auction marts over in Canada that are sold on live weight or on video, would you see many finished cattle that are out of spec? Do you think they're an issue there with cattle being out of spec, that buyers will take them compared to being sold on
out of spec meaning too big?
Yeah, in some cases, yeah, depending on the process of specification. It could be.
Yeah, no, certainly there is a a bias against some types of cattle. There may be a bias of, we don't see a lot of Holstein influence in our cattle coming through the sale barn in Canada. So if there's any touch of that might be a reduced price. Certain colors too. Smoky calves might be discounted. Those types of things, rat tails. You know, so it is quite fickle. It's you know, visually, order buyers will, you know, probably be biased slightly on the type of cattle, be it too big of a frame, or they don't like to see. This is something that might be of value to the listeners. Our order buyers are trying to source cattle that will grow in a finishing program, so they don't like to see over-conditioned cattle coming through the sale barn. They like to see you know, empty cattle, we call them. So cattle that don't have too much finish on them. They want to see cattle that have a good frame, empty cattle that'll go right from the sale barn to the feed yard, go on a hay diet, and then start to go on a concentrate stepwise program. So.
Thank you, Bart. What is your average age at first calving, and what is the annual replacement rate?
Our cull replacement rate runs about 15 to 20%, depending on the operation. It could be less if they've really screened for fertility early on. It could be more if they haven't. The average day of calving, we see most of our herds are still spring calvers. So that can be mostly that March, April time period. They try to get, if they're a multi-enterprise operation, so they're growing grain as well as have beef cattle, they want to get the calving over with so they can concentrate on planting in that June time period. So most herds are calving in the spring. As I said, we have seen some producers going to that summer calving, that May, June, just to try and time nutrient supply with lactating cow requirements. But I would still say that most of the calving is taking place in the spring, March, February, March, mostly March and April. And so then we see the biggest rush of calves, wean calves, hitting the sale barn in that October time period. We call that the fall run. And so you would see more depressed prices at that time. So we'll see some operations that will calve maybe in the summer, won't be weaning until after Christmas and trying to capture that higher price.
Thank you, Bart. So those heifers that would be calving in spring, how old would those first calvers be? Sorry, I might have missed that.
Well, they're generally at 2 years of age. So
okay.
yeah, they would be exposed to that bull at about 13, 14 months. Thank
you. We've got another question here. How do you get water to cows at -40?
Yeah, very good question. We've got the technology. So we have what we call winter watering systems. So that's can be a wet well where we'll set it up to move water from a pond or maybe a deep well below the frost line and comes up into a insulated water trough. They work quite well. So with our engineering friends, we've got some really slick winter watering systems that work quite nicely. They're solar powered usually. We get a lot of sunlight. It's cold and it's but it's clear and sunny, so we take advantage of that with the solar systems. Yeah, so it can be either these wet wells or insulated water troughs. Also, and the insulated water troughs are covered, but there's these drinking cones or these holes in the tops, and so just a minimal amount of water, surface water to freeze. There is a lot of operations that we do get adequate snow depth most winters, and so if it's good 2 feet of snow, soft powdery, we will see snow grazing taking place. And the cows will do quite nice on snow grazing, but they do have to be adapted to that, and there has to be adequate depth and not hard crusted snow.
Thank you, that's really interesting. We've got another one here. What is the cull cow policy, please?
What is the cull cow?
The cull cow policy. So I guess what sort of attributes would you be culling cows?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Why would they be culled? Well, number one would be open.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Feet and legs, poor udders. Temperament can be a big one. If she gives you that look, she's gone. We see, you know, some operations, anything that has calving difficulty, because some of these herds are quite big, there will be a lot of, you know, self-calving, minimal intervention. And so if their cow does have some calving problems, you know, when you're getting herd sizes of, as I said, you know, 400, 500 head, they do have to have a good calving ease, and so that's an obvious cull factor. So yeah, feet, legs, temperament, but certainly open cows in the fall and calving problems in the spring.
Thank you. We've got another one here, Bart. Do you have to TB test your cattle?
No, we don't, which is, we cross our fingers. We don't have that issue. It's not like here, certainly with your issue. We do have other silent issues, i.e. Johne's disease, and that is a big one in my mind. And some herds are diligent and monitor Johne's and do testing rigorously. We do with our research herd for sure, but in my mind it needs to be a better program and just more prudent in making sure that all beef cows, especially those that are selling yearling bulls or replacement heifers, are tested for Johne's.
Thank you. We've got another question here. From your experience and in comparison to Canada, is there a particular area that you think UK farmers could focus on to improve efficiencies? Are we lagging anywhere compared to what you're doing in Canada?
I think, you know, just what I've seen is, and just not the UK, I've visited other European countries, and it is what it is. It's you have smaller herd sizes, you have smaller land base, you're able to grow grass absolutely fantastic. I'm envious that you can grow the grass you do. I wish we could back home. So yeah, take advantage of that. Take advantage of being able to graze as long as you can. There are some areas of your country that I think can outwinter successfully. You may not do it as many months as you hope, but even a few weeks is a good thing. Paying attention to nutrition, making sure that you're getting some of those benchmarks I talked about earlier, some of the key indicators. Making sure you're getting rid of those non-fertile cows and getting your preg rates up there. So.
Thank you. What is the youngest age you would outwinter a calves?
Well, like I just said with our heifer development, we are developing them in an outwintering program. So I'm all for starting them in a swath graze program right from 5 months of age. If they have not been, maybe they're bought in heifers, give them be patient with them. As a 3-year-old, probably, certainly. Obviously, the one thing I see is also pay attention to, we pay attention to our replacement heifers. We get them pregnant, get that first calf, but sometimes we forget, and all of a sudden we call them a cow, and then they go with the main cow herd, and they wind up coming open in after that second breeding season. So we do have to pay attention to nutrition even in that second breeding season, that second gestation period. So, by the third calf, yeah, okay, she can probably make it with the older cows in the rest of the herd. Yeah, so I guess and I'll just comment last is that we're doing another research study where we're looking for what we call forage efficient cows or forage efficient heifers. And so for the last 2 years, we've taken those heifers from as pregnant in the first year and the second year, and they've been out on extensive or outwintering programs. And from those, we're going to actually delve into the rumen and look at the rumen metabolism. And so why are these heifers being more efficient at utilizing forages, say, than the ones that didn't make the cut? So it's going to be an interesting study.
Thank you. What are your stocking rates like, Bart? So during outwintering, how many acres per a cow? This person has asked.
It depends. It depends on, as I say, the size of the pasture. We look at cow days per acre. I just look at the number of cows and number of acres, number of days. So, for example, some of our corn systems, the question was asked earlier this week, what's that going to cost you? I'm looking at, if for the corn systems, if I can get 200 cow days per acre, I broke even. And if I get more, I'm reducing my cow cost per day. For some of the swath graze annual cereal systems, if I can get 100 days, I've met my break-even cost to grow that crop. So yeah, it depends on the input cost. Some of our corn systems are costing right now about $280 to $290 per acre to put in to grow that crop. So I want to get a lot of cow days per acre to meet my break even, and then more to reduce my cow cost per day.
Thank you. And similar question regarding winter feed. How much hay are you using per cow per month?
I use, this is a great question. I get asked all the time by the producers, the farmers in Canada. I use this, our average cow size for our research herd is about 1,300, 1,400 pounds. I'm sorry, it's not kilos. So you'll have to do your conversion. So I'm looking at, percent body weight. So probably 2.5, 2.8% body weight. And I'm saying about 30, 40 pounds of something dry matter per head per day. And so that's so key because I'm figuring in even some soilage costs, some wastage costs there too, because she's out in the field and she's not vacuuming up every bit of feed. So that's a number that I look at and say, okay, I'm going to predict I've got a swath grazed barley field or maybe a corn field or maybe some straw chaff. I know how much I have per length of swath or per row of corn. That's how I time my allocation and move my electric fence.
Thank you. Got another question here. How do you think the cows would perform during our wet winters compared to your dry but cold conditions?
Yeah, I've heard that rain is a detriment for sure. Yeah, it is more of a challenge. There's probably it would be a bigger challenge to respond to that question. I think that there's maybe some farms in certain parts of your country that have different soil types, maybe those sandy type soils that may not be as mucky and may be more conducive to having cows in an outwintering program versus a clayey type soil. So yeah, you really have to look at what are the opportunities. Maybe not the lowland parts of your farm, maybe some of the upland parts of your farm. You don't want to be doing it near some sloping areas going into a riparian or a creek or a watershed. So yeah, it'll depend on where you're located. This may not be an option for you, and certainly it'll be dependent on where you're located and your soil type.
Thank you. We've got an interesting question here. Is the Canadian government pro-farmer, and are Canadian beef farmers excited by a potential free trade deal with the UK?
We are over the moon, in fact. Yes, we continue to lobby our federal government employees, including our Prime Minister. We have a very active federal beef industry organization called Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and they are in Ottawa all the time lobbying politicians and making sure they hear loud and clear the concerns of the Canadian beef producer. We have a very strong organization in our province of Saskatchewan, and I'm very pleased to say that our provincial government in Saskatchewan are very supportive of our beef industry in terms of programs and in terms of support for extension and activities like this. So yeah, we just have to always be on it and lobbying and making sure they're hearing our concerns.
Thank you. Another question here. What age are most animals slaughtered at, and what is an average expected daily live weight gain?
Well, during that store period, during the back running period, the average daily gain would be around 2.5, probably more like 2.25. When they come into that finishing program, they're gaining at least 3.5, maybe sometimes close to 4 pounds a day, right up until that final weight and that weight can be, depending on the frame size, they'll finish out at 1,300 pounds. Some might even go, heavier to 1,500 pounds. We're trying to, bring them out to about those final weights at 13, 14 months of age, maybe 15 months of age. Our grading system is looking at youthful. It rewards youthful cattle, so no ossification in the skeleton. So we're grading on meat yield and we're grading on meat quality. So yield grade 1s and AAA marbling would be more of a youthful animal at that 14 month of age.
Thank you. And what is the optimum mature cow weight in Canada, please?
I think you need to look at what is your system. If you in your breed, are you a program where you are 50-50 with forages and concentrates? Are you a program where you're maybe 80% forages and 20% concentrates, or maybe 90% forages? So I think with some of those strong forage-based systems, be it grass or grass legume or grazing systems, I feel that cow should be about 1,300, 1,350. That's pounds, I'm sorry, do the conversion. Those, bigger cows have a greater demand, greater dry matter intake. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. I've just done a quick conversion, and 1,300 pounds is 589 kilos. So next question, how do you select bulls, please?
We have regular bull sales, and they start generally in that January time period for those summer breeding programs. So if you want your cows calving in April, you would turn your bulls out the back end of June. So you want to get to those bull sales, make your choice in those January, February sales. If you're looking for bulls by March, you're probably getting the bottom end in those sales. So yeah, you have to be prudent. You have to look for what type of bull is going to work for me on my farm or my ranch. You know, some folks will go with those bulls that are reared on more of a concentrate diet. Some really want to see those forage raised type bulls, because that's the type of bull that's going to go out in those pastures. So they're looking at obviously conformation, you know, body size. Certainly they're looking at scrotal circumference, looking at EPDs, expected progeny differences, and the accuracy of those EPDs. So, and we suggest that, you know, maybe you need to look at 2 or 3 traits on your breeding program, decide whether you're a maternal program or a terminal program, and pick your bulls on that. We do see operations trying to find what we call heifer bulls. So that's low birth body weight bulls, because we want to see that heifer get through that first calving as easy as possible and then come back and cycle. So lower birth body weight bulls, and then maybe go to those larger birth body weight bulls for the mature cows. So yeah, largely it's conformation, looking at the EPDs, going out and looking at them in the pens prior to sale time.
Thank you. What profit do you look to achieve per cow?
That's a good question. It'll depend on the operation whether they're making money or not. Oh, you know, it varies. It really does. Obviously, you want to be making money. You know, whether it's every year, whether it's $100 per cow or maybe $50 a cow or $200 a cow. It'll all depend on how you've looked at your unit cost of production. It'll depend on how many cows you have. The other thing I see is that some ranches, some of these operations that have multi-enterprises, so they'll have a grain operation, they'll have a hay operation, a cow-calf operation, and maybe a finishing operation. And so it's important to see which one of those enterprises are making you money and which ones are being subsidized by the other enterprises. And so maybe put your efforts into the profitable enterprise and maybe think about finding out why that one enterprise is not being profitable.
Thanks, Bart. That's really good advice. I've got another question here. Do you need to supplement with protein, and do you provide supplementary protein when grazing corn stalks?
We do. That's my suggestion when they're coming close to calving, is that protein can be a little deficient in corn. Can be sitting about 6-7% when they're needing probably 9 or so % coming into calving. So that's a strong recommendation. Protein sup would be an alfalfa hay or maybe a rolled grain, or could be a pelleted product from a feed mill or something. Yeah, we don't typically have to supplement protein in a winter program unless they're on a crop residue program. But typically, if it's a bale graze program or a stockpile forage, you know, that should be adequate there. I really find with a cold, dry winter that energy is a limiting nutrient, and so making sure they're getting good energy supplement, or there's adequate energy in the forage itself.
Thank you. And following on from that, what body condition score would your cows be entering the winter in?
Yeah, great question. We follow the same as you do, a scale of 1 to 5, the British system. So I'm suggesting 2.5 to 3 coming into the winter feeding program. We also strive, and every producer talk I do, every farmer talk I do is my objective in a research trial is to maintain body condition. So them coming in 2.5 to 3 in the fall, and then coming out in a 2.5 to 3. So don't want to lose condition. You don't want to have too fat a condition. So yeah, 2.5 to 3. And my final comment is that thin cows don't rebreed and fat cows don't rebreed. So.
Thanks, Bart. And we've just got a couple more questions, if it's all right, just to rattle through those. So can you advise on the running costs in regards to vet and med costs on a per cow basis, please?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry, could you advise what are your average running costs in regards to the vet and med costs per cow per year?
The weaning costs?
Sorry, the vet and med costs per
the vet
cow.
and med costs per cow?
Sorry.
Oh my goodness. Off the top of my head, sorry, I don't know that number. We do see, I apologize for that, but we do see now in Canada that every producer, every farmer has to have a vet-client relationship. A lot has changed in terms of access to antibiotics and drugs, and so you do need that vet-client relationship, which probably has been in your country for some years, but before we were able to probably go and purchase some of those antibiotics over the counter at maybe a hardware store, but that's changed significantly. We also do use another thing, where our beef code of practice now is in place, and we do have to use pain mitigation. So whether we're dehorning or whether we're castrating, that has to be part of the procedure. Either a Metacam or something to provide an analgesic for that management technique.
Thank you, Bart. We've got a couple of questions here about the breeds. So are most of your cows from native breeds? And following on from that, are there any beef shorthorn herds in Canada?
There are some shorthorn herds, yes. We don't have any native, sorry, I lied. We have a Hayes converter. We do have some composites. We have beef booster. Yeah, so they do make up a certain percentage of the herd, of the breed types, but most of our herds are composed of most of those British type cattle or those continental type cattle.
Thank you. Do you know what the root cause of the BSE outbreak in Canada was?
They traced it back in May of 2003 to a feed mill, to a diet that included protein coming from a meat source. And so since then, all legislation has passed that protein cannot be a meat meal. And so, yeah, so we've certainly done away with that.
Thank you, Bart. Just got 2 questions left. Is steer beef favoured over bull beef in Canada? It
is. Interesting. Yes, we do surgically castrate. We try to ring them at birth. That's what we see most ranchers do. So they are a steer from day one, or at a very young age, and so so that way we obviously they will they will gain on pasture and gain in a finishing program. So being intact on a there tends to be could be some issues with dark cutter beef or some fighting or some issues in terms of damaging the carcass if they're still intact males.
Thank you, Bart. And the last question, what are your top tips or key advice points for someone that's considering rethinking their suckler system?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
And finally, what would your top tips be or key advice points for somebody that's considering rethinking their suckler herd at home?
Okay, yeah, I understand that a suckler herd is keeping the cow year round is a very expensive cost. I think that's the top tips are maybe looking at your investment in buildings and facility, in the housing. Is it even going to work if I think about alternatives like trying to have them out grazing longer in the summer, longer in the fall, maybe even portion of the winter in an outwintering program? Which one of those outwintering programs will work for me? Those would be the tips. As my comment about unit cost of production, it's really all about, do you lower costs or do you get more kilo of calf or pound of calf from the cow? So working at both ends of that equation is certainly something to look at. What factors can I control and which ones can I not control?
Thanks very much, Bart. So thank you for that. We've gone slightly over time, and I do apologise for the couple of questions that are left that we haven't got round to answering. So thanks, Bart. That was really interesting, and thank you for coming all the way from Canada to talk to us these last few days.
Thanks to all the listeners.
Yes, thank you very much to everyone at home for listening. Sorry that we have overrun, but it's been a really interesting session. And again, the recording of this webinar will be emailed in the next day or two. So if you'd like to recap on anything heard tonight, then it'll be on email and on YouTube. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.